Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Heartbeat of the Dance Floor. Today I have with me a very, very special man, not only in the music business, but also on a personal note. I've known Ray since my first days as a professional in the biz, as they say. In January of 1977, I was a publicist for the Howard Bloom organization, and we shared the same office building as TK Records at 65 East 55th Street in New York City. And as if that wasn't enough, Howard Bloom also shared his office suite with Ray's twin brother, Bob, who was a booking agent. Ray ran the TK Records New York City office as their company was headquartered in Miami, Florida, coincidentally, where I had just moved from to begin my career in New York City. Prior to TK Records, Ray began his dance music career doing independent promotions for Dr. Brizard's original Savannah Band and for Vicki Sue Robinson. Over the years, Ray added some other freelance promotions for other record labels like Polydor, Sire, and RCA Records to his already impressive resume of heading promotion, marketing, and A&R departments at various record labels. This ultimately led to Ray's founding of his own record label, RFC Records, a division of Warner Brothers. These days, Raymond has revived his label as RFC Fresh Records and has new releases with artists like Petawane, Sons of Funk, and Taiwan. It is my absolute pleasure to have as my guest today, Ray Caviano. Welcome to the Heartbeat of the Dance Floor, Ray.
Well, hello, Marsha. Good to be with you today.
Thank you.
Well, here we are. In post 40 years ago, we were dancing then, and are we still dancing?
We indeed are. Haven't stopped dancing yet, my friend.
That was a good song. Haven't Stopped Dancing, Gonzalez. There you go.
Yes, indeed. Wonderful remix by John Luongo, actually.
That was a good segue, right, Marsha?
It was. It was perfect. You know.
Oh, my God. There's my picture. There I am. Oh,
there
my.
You are.
Oh,
I began my career with you, and I swear you were one of the first 6 people that I met. And I must say that I learned what it was to be a professional, both from Howard Bloom and from you. And from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for giving me that example as a malleable, wide-eyed, young, nothing from Florida.
Yeah, that was an interesting office I was working in. One of the things that I also did, that I wound up in that office working with Sire and helping with them with the acts. There was a guy named Miles Copeland who managed a lot of British acts. They were on Sire and what have you. So I shared an office with British talent managers, Miles Copeland, with an attorney, you know this name, Alan Grubman. And,
yes.
That was Alan's office at 65. What was that, 65 East 55th?
65 East 55th. And actually, I had a link into Alan through a family friend in Florida before I even moved to New York. And then, I guess a year after Howard Bloom, I ended up working for Jacques and Henri at Can't Stop Productions, also in the same building, but on the 4th floor.
Right. And that was a good office to work in because being with Alan, who was a young attorney now, right now he's one of the biggest entertainment music lawyers in the business. He was just starting, and he introduced me to people like Tommy Mottola, and I worked at Savannah Band, and Vicki Sue Robinson's manager, Ted Harless, and what have you. And having worked with Miles Copeland with his acts, all of a sudden, Alan introduced me, if you will, to Henry Stone, the famous Henry Stone. And I don't know if people know who Henry Stone is. You may want to educate the audience.
Yes, I am going to interject that Henry Stone was the founder and president of TK Records, which was the only record company in South Florida in the early 70s and had mega hits with George McCrae, with Betty Wright, and with Casey and the Sunshine Band, which really kind of put them on the map.
Yeah, George McCrae sold 80 million singles with Rock Your Baby. It was a hit in over 75 countries around the world. And, of course, Casey was huge, etc. And
George was a nice guy, too.
Yeah, so Alan Grubman, the attorney, created an entree to me to Henry. And at this point, I knew that things were starting to bubble in New York City back then in various clubs. There was a guy, I don't know if you know his name, but he was one of the younger disco dance promotion guys. He was working for 20th Century Records with the Ritchie family, Brazil, and Betty Wright. His name was Billy Smith.
Yes, of course.
And Billy was one of
the infamous Billy Smith. Was this before his London days?
Yes, exactly. And truth be told, he kind of introduced me to, we would go around to the various clubs, Barefoot Boy, Tony Smith, God rest his soul, and various, 12 West and Flamingo, there was David Mancuso's Loft and Nicky Ciano's Gallery, and Billy and I would go around literally 6 or 7 days of the week going to clubs, and not for anything, he really introduced me to the terrain of the club scene in New York, which was starting to bubble. And, quite frankly, with all due respect to Billy, he helped me really jump into this field. And where else would be better but in New York City, where the dance disco scene was exploding. I mean, we had records like Rock the Boat by the Hughes Corporation sold 60,000 copies with no radio play.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, I remember being at the cusp of that dilemma of, oh my God, we have record sales and it has nothing to do with radio. How do we chart it? How do we figure it out? And that was kind of my entree to disco, through, as I say, Ritchie Family African Queens, which was a TK product.
It was, and it was
TK
a
Marlin.
great.
Did it on the Marlin label, wonderful record.
Right.
And there was this dilemma of how are we accounting for all of these mega sales that were at the time. I think the record, they were very surprised. All of a sudden, disco was a multi-million, if not billion-dollar business. And where did it come from? And nobody could chart it on the radio. There was no disco radio station back then. There was BLS, which was predominantly R&B. Frankie Crocker, a huge proponent. But yeah, I mean, this was the beginning.
But then we had disco radio come along with the WKTU and all these stations, and they
wasn't that in the 80s?
It was like at the the end of 1980, around that period. The change, because that's when Change came out on the RFC label, and that was 1980 itself, and what have you. And Frankie Crocker, though, was the architect of urban contemporary radio in New York.
Agreed.
And he helped bridge the gap of both the black audience and the Caucasian audience when he started playing artists like Donna Summer. Once he did that, Gloria Gaynor, BT Express, Soul Makusa, Hughes Corporation, the list is endless. He just kept breaking hit after hit after hit.
Speaking of, I'm throwing up a picture. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about this, because it has pretty much all the characters, including Frankie and so many others. Boy, Betty Wright.
Yeah, Betty Wright, who, God bless her soul. There's Judy Weinstein, who was the architect of For the Record Pool, which was one of the mainstay record pools in New York City. And there's Ashford and Simpson and Frankie. Frankie has since passed away, and Nick has passed away.
Nick has passed away. I remember, Frankie was a regular at the VIP room in Larry's garage.
That's an understatement. I mean, are we going to go that far into the journey of the Paradise Garage? Because that's going down the road a little bit.
Well, Ray, the focus of what I'm trying to bring out in this series has to do with what may be considered a somewhat abstract theory. What is the heartbeat? The heartbeat of the dance floor. I think it goes beyond a dance floor as most people define it. And if the heartbeat, for example, comes from the music, that music would not exist. That heartbeat would not exist if it was not for the artist. Whether it was the songwriter, the musician, or the singers, producers, that it would not exist in the public's mind if not for people like you that were either the executives at the record companies that created the saleable, marketable material, or the people that actually promoted it through your promotions. Everything is kind of intertwined. So as I look at this series and I look at your role in how it pertains to a heartbeat, you've just touched upon something. There were songs that you were instrumental in. You orchestrated either the development of them or the promotion of them. Those songs had lives of their own in many ways. They had heartbeats. I think we like to call them classics. Mm-hmm. There were also clubs that had heartbeats in and of themselves just by the virtue of what they are, and other ones that have other side components. So when we talk about a place like the Garage, that could be a place that has multiple heartbeats. It has the heartbeat for what it is, as the club for what it represented, for the music. And then again, maybe there's a story that of your own personal heartbeat as it might pertain to a record that you were promoting or an artist that you worked with that did a show there or something like that. So you see how I kind of fracture this concept a little
Right,
bit?
right, exactly. And the heartbeat is an orchestration of the various architects who make this whole disco dance music genre become a reality. You had disco radio and Frankie Crocker of BLS. You had the club owners, people like Michael Fesco of Flamingo and Tony and Alan of 12 West, and the DJs, Jim Burgess, your famous Roy Thode, who was, talk about the heartbeat of Fire Island and the Ice Palace.
Mm.
So it was a coming together of all these different dynamics and elements that have come to pass, and it was such an exciting period. When you had a guy like David Mancuso, who made the first private club a real entity in New York, and he could program music like nobody else. Nicky Ciano, and then there was a place called the Firehouse. I don't know if you heard about that.
No, I think that might have been before my time there.
That was one of the first early gay clubs. It was literally an old firehouse down there near Houston Street, and it was packed. Unbelievable. These were the early beginnings. And then you had clubs like the Sanctuary with Francisco Grasso and Walter Gibbons. These are all the architects that even started way before Larry. The scene was really beginning to happen. Yes, on Fire Island. I mean, the Pavilion and Cherry Grove was pumping. Tom Moulton was like spinning 45s even before it became more formal and what have you. So it was in a very exciting period during that time in terms of the clubs, the DJs, the music, the radio stations, the club owners. So you want to talk about a heartbeat. That's a real big scenario of what made this a very viable industry at the time, don't you think?
I do, and I'm hoping that it gives me fodder for many interesting episodes as I explore all the multiple facets. And too much to your point, I do have venue owners that are scheduled for interviews. I have, as yourself, a promoter, other promoters I've interviewed, producers, artists that are on the spectrum. I do want to bring as many different viewpoints into this because as an arts and entertainment professional, I've found that collaboration gives the greatest product in the end. And whether it's a theater production or a concert or a dance show or a special event or a party, or even in your case, packaging an album, mixing an album, going into a studio and recording and putting it together, it's the collaborative efforts that,
well, what can I say, Marsha? How fortunate was I during that time period? Because back then, you had Vince Aletti, who was one of the first journalists to talk about disco in Rolling Stone magazine, talking about how the scene was really starting to happen big time. And there's Vince.
There's Vince, a little modern day picture of you and Vince, but indeed, Vince, oh my God, and what a great book he has written as well.
Right. Where he gives all the data of all the playlists of all the DJs through the years. Unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And Vince was one of the first journalists to, in a sense, give credibility to the scene. And Vince wound up, when I went to Warner Brothers and my own label, which we talk about in a minute, I hired him to be my vice president of A&R.
Yes.
And he was an excellent executive to the team. And whatever. Vince had a funny joke. He said, listen, I made money as a journalist, but I didn't really make money until I went to RFC Warner Brothers. So he really appreciated taking it to the next level and what have you. And listen, I mean, what can I say? I was at the right place at the right time, being in New York. Fire Island was bubbling, and all these clubs that I've articulated were bubbling. And the records were just breaking without radio airplay. The scene was just...
it was an amazingly prolific time all across every spectrum of the arts, because in those, the late 70s, early 80s, pre-AIDS, you could just pick a different genre every night and find something in the city that would satisfy you. It was amazing. And there was also incredible overlap, I found.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It was wonderful. It really was wonderful.
I mean, whatever scene you liked or that you're into, I mean, it was there. And not only just in the New York level, but on a national level. John Luongo had a record pool up in Boston. He started doing mixes. Miami was really bustling, even though
you had Bo
Crane.
Record pool.
Right.
There was another one in Miami. I forgot.
Right. So we had record pools, Flamingo Record Pool and the Florida Record Pool.
Yes.
And Bill Kelly
all over
was down there.
Major markets. And you're right. It was a movement that created an industry, I think.
Exactly. And I mean, that's, I guess, what led to the development of the story of me going to Warner Brothers. It's a quick little story. I was working for TK, and we were doing very well, obviously, with all the artists at TK. I signed Voyage and Boris Midney to the roster, and we had T Connection, George McCrae, KC, Betty Wright, Jimmy Bohorn, Foxy. The list was endless. And at one point in time, I think Mo Austin, who's the chairman of the board of Warner Brothers, I guess he was kind of entertaining, wanting to get into the dance music field and what have you. And he called Henry, who he knew, because before TK was a record company, it also was a distribution company. It was called Tone Distributors. Yes. And back in the day, they distributed Warner Brothers records. So he knew Mo Austin. Look, Henry was the founder of TK. He signed, a lot of people don't know, Ray Charles and James Brown, and he's been around. He's one of the big architects of not only dance music, but R&B. And he knew Mo Austin, the chairman of Warner Brothers. And Mo called Henry one day and said, "Hey, if you don't mind, I have a special project I need help on. It's a female model out of France. Her name is Madeleine Kane. Would you mind, Henry, if I could borrow Ray to work as a consultant to help me with this project?" Henry said, "Yeah, go ahead. Use Ray. No problem." Well, you want to know something, Marsha? You shouldn't have done that.
He shouldn't have done that.
I mean...
but Henry was that kind of a guy, though. So do you remember when you loaned me Madeleine Kane to do a special promotion with her singing live at Sahara?
Yes. Oh, my God.
I'm sorry I don't have that graphic with me. I still have my advertisement, but it's in Florida. So I'll have to add it to our Facebook pages when I get back to Florida.
Okay.
But indeed, I still have that invite.
and as it turned out, I worked that
what
project.
What a wonderful record she was.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Hang on. I've got a picture of Madeleine to throw up.
There she is.
Beautiful woman. Great voice. Great record. Still to this day, I hear it.
Yeah, Rough Diamond was a Jim Burgess remix, and Forbidden Love. And when I took on this project as for Warner Brothers, working as a consultant, while I'm an employee of TK, that's kind of unusual. The record did go to #1, and that I had just won Promotion Man of the Year at the disco conventions 4 years in a row.
Is that when this picture was from? I couldn't get a year on it.
Yep. That's about,
beautiful.
I would say that's probably 79.
That was going to be my guess. Now, this one looks to be also around the same era.
Well, that's a little later because that's when I'm with Warner Brothers.
So that's after 80. I'm sorry, I didn't read the headline very well.
Right.
Never mind. Here we go back to Donna.
Yeah, and that was at the Billboard Disco Convention, which were big. You went to those conventions, Marsha?
I certainly did. I went to that one and a couple before. In fact, a very odd cross-reference I had years later in my lighting career through the guys that headed up a lighting company in Austin called High End Systems.
Right.
They had an AV company back in the mid-late 70s. And that AV company supplied all the audio-visual gear for that awards presentation.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We were just kind of sharing stories over beers one year, and it kind of came out that we were in the same place at the same time in the 70s.
Yeah.
Each doing different things. I had not yet begun my lighting career. I was still, at that time, 79, I was working with Joe Long and the Joe Long Sound. Another thank you to you, because it is through you that I met Bob Small. and
Right.
Joe Long, and began working with Joe on his Midnight Rhythm projects, and then the Joe Long
Which wound
Sound
up on
project,
Atlantic Records.
which was on Atlantic Records, exactly. And that kind of brought my dream of maybe not being a songwriter yet, but certainly working in music as a producer. That let me taste the reality of that. It was a dream come true for a young, barely 25-year-old kid. I'll tell you what, it was pretty amazing. I'm going to jump back just a minute in your history here because we talked a lot about TK, and TK had wonderful records, and I just want to share with our audience one of the ones that, again, here's a huge dance hit again to this day. Peter Brown, Dance With Me, one of my first publicity assignments, a huge hit for TK Records.
Very big. It was a big record. It was a club hit, an R&B hit, and a pop hit. And Betty Wright worked that record with Peter.
And I remember our publicity hit was that Peter Brown recorded it in his bedroom on a 4-track tape recording.
Right, exactly.
That was, I think I still have the press release somewhere.
And I don't know if you remember, but 60 Minutes did a story on disco.
Yes, indeed. They featured it.
And they featured this record and Peter Brown in the studio with Betty Wright singing. And they were showing how you orchestrate the various elements of putting a so-called disco record together.
Indeed, I do remember that. I absolutely do remember that interview. Another huge dance music records came out of T Connection, another great TK artist.
Right. This is at Midnight, and they had the previous hit, Do What You Want to Do.
Yep. Also a radio hit, as I recall. Do What You
Want.
Right.
There was a major record.
Major records. And I don't know if this one never made it commercial or it was just more of a disco record. And I'm sorry, the A in the beginning, half of the M is cut off on the left. Amant is the group.
Right.
And was this also a Jim Burgess mix, or
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Okay. The producer was a guy named Ray Martinez.
Yes.
And he also did Foxy with a big crossover hit called Get Off.
Yes.
That was huge. And this was a big club record, and it was a big disco radio record. But it wasn't a pop record per se.
No, but it was a huge club record, and it was a very up record. It was a record that you always had arms in the air on the dance floor.
It was in
a very happy crowd.
It was in the same genre of Love and Kisses and Don Ray and Cerrone, and that's the reason why I signed Voyage to TK, because I wanted TK, which was known to be kind of a funky label out of Miami. I wanted to compete with the so-called Casablanca Euro disco sound, and Voyage with Souvenir was just huge.
Now, I will never forget one day being in my office at Howard Bloom, a floor below you, and all this hubbub and commotion, and we were all ordered upstairs. I think Bob gathered us together, and we all had to go to your office. And you were so excited to play for us your latest discovery, which was Boris Midney, USA European Connection. Boy. Beautiful. And it, coming to my heart. And we were dancing up a storm. Bob Small was there. He was like, come on upstairs, y'all. You guys got to hear this. You guys got to hear this. And me and Mark Bigo, Barbara Shelley, and your brother Bob, we all ran up. We had a little dance party in your office listening to this new group you had just signed, which was the producer, Boris.
And it wasn't the atypical sound for TK,
It was very atypical for TK. It was a lot more in line with that lush orchestration.
Exactly.
A brilliant, brilliant producer. In fact, if my memory serves me, didn't he kind of introduce that 48-track recording studio into New York at the end of the 70s?
He did. 48-track. I mean, this guy, he made a sound, a record, the big production sound, lush production, just unbelievable. And then not only that record, then we did a follow-up, and the album was called Beautiful Bend.
Beautiful Bend, of course, which was even lusher. In some ways, it was even lusher.
Right. And it was a huge #1 club hit. And then when I went to Warner Brothers, I gave Boris a deal, and he put out an album on RFC Warner. The album was called Caress, and it did very well in the clubs.
Now, another producer that you've worked with, who again had the producers have projects by names, but this one producer, Greg Diamond, had a very successful project, Bionic Boogie, which was on Polydor, but I know you were involved in this one as well.
Right. It was one of
Classic.
the independent projects I worked before I formally joined TK. So there were three projects I worked: the Savannah Band, Vicky Sue Robinson, and this one, uh, Risky Changes, was the hit. And the hidden fact around this is that Luther Vandross was on this album. He also had a great record that was mixed by Jim Burgess, Hot Butterfly, and it was huge. And
Yes.
the thing is that Luther was on this album, and this album did well, but Luther really didn't get the real shine, so to speak, that the Change album got when he did the Change album with Searching, Glow of Love, and Lover's Holiday. And
Well,
there you are.
that was, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that one of your first releases on RFC?
In fact, it was. It was the
Okay.
first signing, and it went gold.
And you're right. This is the first time I think that Luther was recognized as a frontman. It was prior to his career as a single artist, and prior to that, he did a lot of background vocals for us at Joe Long Sound.
Right.
He's on the Gershwin. He's on Hallelujah 2000, along with many notable background musicians and singers. But yeah, that was kind of where Luther and Valerie Simpson, to a degree, that kind of made their bread and butter doing background. And
he was on David Bowie's Young Americans,
yes,
and what have you. And he was on the Bionic Boogie album. Even though the Bionic Boogie album was a huge hit, he didn't seem to get the publicity or the artist development image behind it the way Change did. And yes, after he did the Change album and the Glow of Love, which was a major hit, there were three hits on the Change album: Glow of Love, Searching, and Lover's Holiday.
And still to this day, I hear them on the radio.
Unbelievable. And that segued
I dare say you gave him his career as a solo artist.
And he recognizes that, and I appreciate that. Unfortunately, he passed away.
Yes, another sad soul lost.
And this artwork is Greg Porto's artwork. A lot of people love Greg. He's passed away, and he did this artwork.
He did all of these four. Unbelievable. What a sweet, another dear friend gone way too early, way too soon. And very talented. And I believe also I have two more pieces of Greg's art to show, the top two renditions from the Gino SOCCIO first two albums that Greg also did. And these also were albums that were on your RFC label.
And you know what's interesting, Marsha? These are not your atypical disco-looking covers, if you will. You know,
not at all.
It was more of an abstract look, and it just brought, I think, as opposed to just, disco lights and all this glitter. He gave it more of an artsy look that I think, like the Change album cover. I mean, that's so futuristic. It
launched a new sound, it launched a new label, and it launched a new look. So all in all, Greg did, I think, exactly what one would have wanted for the moment. You were creating a new endeavor, and what a sweet man. I think of Greg often.
Yeah, Robbie Leslie loves his artwork. He keeps sending me stuff and posting stuff about Greg's artwork.
Nice.
Apparently, Robbie was a big fan of Greg's artwork.
Nice,
and then the Gino SOCCIO signing after Change, Dancer.
It's probably around the same time that you signed him.
Yeah, this is probably at the Studio 54 party, the launching of RFC. Warner Brothers threw a party, and Gino, needless to show up. Diana Ross showed up.
Yeah, I remember that party.
Evelyn. Yeah, it was a great party, and Dancer was #1 on the Billboard dance disco charts for 8 weeks. Unbelievable.
It was fabulous.
Fabulous. And then when I moved to Atlantic a couple of years later, I took Gino and Change with me, and Change had a big record with Paradise, and Gino had a big record with Try It Out. So
let's see, back here, Paradise, was this the bottom right on Change?
I think it might be. If I'm not, no. It's the top right.
Top right. I'm sorry. Yes, that was the last one. And Gino was. I'm trying to think if it was either bottom left or bottom right.
It was the bottom left.
Bottom left. Okay.
There you go.
Scratching the recesses of my mind here, Ray.
It was a perfect storm getting this deal with Warner Brothers at the time, and it was a 3-year deal. It gave me a complete autonomy to sign artists, as well as not only being the head of RFC Records, but head of the Warner Brothers dance music department. And we had a great cavalcade of hits with Ashford and Simpson, Found a Cure, B-52s, Rock Lobster. We took the concept of disco to dance music and integrated what we call dance-oriented rock. And not only that, Devo had a big record with Whip It.
Yes, yes.
We had Chaka Khan with.
I was going to say, didn't you have something to do with one of the Talking Heads, Once in a Lifetime?
Yes, and so these and
Roy
Larry
loved that record.
I could imagine, and Larry Levan loved that record. He also loved the Clash.
You know, there was one thing. Both Roy and Larry stepped outside the box of what you would call, quote, disco music, and they had no compunction to throw in some rock and roll because they felt like it, or the mood struck them, or throw in something that was just like wackadoodle out of left field, but it worked. It worked amazingly well, and, you know, God bless them. God rest both of their souls.
Larry would play Rock the Casbah like over and over again. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
He loved the Clash. And, of all the clubs that we're talking about here, don't you think that the Paradise Garage sits at the top of the heap of being one of the most iconic clubs?
Absolutely.
I think so.
Without a doubt, and in no small part because it was Larry's house, and Larry had the autonomy to create this environment, and that environment was so welcomed by everyone. He created this. The heartbeat of the garage was very unique. I won't say it was the only heartbeat in town.
Right.
Heartbeat of the Ice Palace on Fire Island was very unique, and it was very different than the one in the city, though they both did have, Jimmy Mary clubs also had a certain je ne sais quoi about them, if you will.
Right.
And many, many other clubs. I mean, I remember going to Buttermilk Bottoms in the city, a whole different feel, but again, you had a different group. But for iconic clubs that really changed music and the music industry, Garage definitely at the top of the game.
But let me tell you that particular club and Larry, literally, I would take Frankie Crocker there on a Friday night or a Saturday night. I would bring some test pressings with me. For example, one night I brought Gino SOCCIO's Dancer, and I had a relationship with Larry that he trusts me. When I tell him about the record, he played it for the crowd or what have you, and it was unbelievable. At that club, WBLS was being programmed by Larry Levan. People don't know that necessarily. So he played Dancer on a Friday night. Marsha, Dancer was on WBLS next Monday morning in rotation.
Yep.
Unbelievable. Yep. And the Garage became so popular that in England they have a club called the Ministry of Sound, and it's really a replica of the Garage.
I've never been to it. I heard it was very much formulated after Garage. And, in no small part, at least my personal feeling is, if it wasn't for the Garage and what was created there, and prior to that at the Gallery, right, I don't know if house music and Frankie Knuckles would have created house music in much the same way he did when he went to Chicago.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole other. Yeah, Marsha. That becomes a little bit of a controversial subject as to where.
Maybe, but I'm looking chronologically. If you look at it chronologically and nowhere else, Frankie was in New York before he was in Chicago.
That's true, but you had a guy named Ron Hardy who was a big DJ in Chicago, and what can I say? In the '80s, the Garage did help carry on the new genre of house music that came forward. But the only difference with the house music, it didn't cross over to the radio the way some of these records that I've just articulated cross over to the radio, like a Gloria Gaynor, a Hughes Corporation, a Soul Makusa, the Tramps.
Or Dr. Blizzard's Savannah Band. Here's a picture.
Yeah, that album went platinum.
So lovely, Corey Day. Oh, what a dream.
House music was more of a tribal sound. It didn't have the lyrical strength that some of these records we're talking about. Listen, I'm old-fashioned. Even with our current relaunch of the RFC Fresh label, I'm doing more R&B right now because there is no real club scene right now. Can you? Where is it? It doesn't really exist anymore, to the best of my knowledge, except various clubs that from time to time they'll throw parties or whatever. But we don't have the network that we used to have back in the day. Would you agree?
Agreed. I would totally agree. I mean, I remember learning from people like you, the best in the biz, how to promote. When it was my turn to be a record promoter, that's what I did. The same thing that you did. You spent every night in the club. You went to multiple clubs a night. You spent time in the booth. You got to know the DJs. They used to come to my apartment when I worked for Areola to get records. You
Right.
had personal relationships with everyone. There were some records you had that you knew this DJ would go wackadoo for, and another one maybe not quite so much, but maybe they liked the B-side.
Right.
It was much more personal, and I remember, seeing so much interaction. I'm a little removed from that world these days myself. I don't know if the DJs have the kind of sharing and interaction that they did back then. They were a group of guys that were out to get the best music for their audience. And when they found a wonderful record, they wanted to share it with other DJs. It wasn't
unbelievable. Yeah.
Who was who could be king of the mountain. It was, how many can I share this with so that everybody enjoys this fabulous record? And I think in no small part, that was how we got huge record sales without radio play as well.
Yeah, definitely. And the DJs of yesteryear who are still around, whatever, they're getting most of their work in Europe. David Morales lives in Italy.
And here's a couple of yesteryear folk that are still with us. On the left, Jelly Bean, who is still very prolific, has his own show on Sirius XM Studio 54 Radio. And on the right of you is John Luongo, who is incredibly prolific still as a producer and companies and management. And,
John Luongo, his name is on so many records, it's ridiculous.
Unbelievable. Although you are running a close second to him. I'm going to throw up a quick amalgam. We mentioned very briefly Jim Burgess. This is a compilation of many of the remixes that our dear friend Jim Burgess did, and many of these you promoted as well.
Exactly. And there's Change right there in the middle with Lover's Holiday, and Venus Dotson, Not Writer. That was a big record. You said, were you around? Were you in the studio with Linda Clifford and Runaway Love?
I was in the studio when Jim mixed Linda Clifford, and also when he mixed Rod Stewart. Do You Think I'm Sexy?
And
we were good friends, and we hung out a lot.
You realize Jim, the records that he did, I used two mixers for the most part, with some exceptions. I used Richie Rivera for a couple of things. I used T. Scott for a couple of things who worked at Better Days. But Jim Burgess and Larry Levan were my main two mixers. Jim, do you do it? The resentment from the rock and roll department of Warner Brothers, they weren't happy that we made a disco record out of Do You Think I'm Sexy? It sold 3 million singles.
Yeah, they weren't happy until they looked at the receipts.
Right, exactly. And
when accounting got hold of it, they said, "Yo, wait a minute, you guys, this is a good thing."
Jim was an incredible mixer, and he was classically trained. He would
sing
opera.
Jim was brilliant. Jim and I used to sing opera arias. Jim was, God rest his soul too, another one gone too long. Absolutely brilliant. And he had a classical music background, whereas not every DJ had a proper music education or a musical background. They were just good at what they did. Some just had that innate God-given talent to be pitch perfect and meter perfect.
Yeah.
Jim was all of that and classically trained.
Yeah.
And an opera singer.
Yeah, and he, I can see why he would like a Boris Midney type record. You know what I mean?
Oh my God, yeah.
That it was so big. He did that. I see here he remixed on Warner Brothers, a good project, Love Deluxe. Here Comes That Sound, of which Greg Porter did a cover on that particular one. So there's so many titles, so much music. It's been an incredible ride, if you will. It's so sad that we see that people who we know are no longer with us. We just recently lost Tony Smith,
which was so sad, and it just makes me say that it is First, how grateful I am to have known and had relationships with so many fantastic people, and how
Right.
important it is to reach out, to say hello, to pick up a phone, not just in our digital world and do likes on Facebook, but actually go call your friend that maybe you haven't spoken to in 30 years, but gave you something once, way, way, way long ago that made you smile. You know, it's so important to do that because so often we're just too late. I mean, my goodness, last week we just lost Frank Core, another
Right.
wonderful DJ from back in the day.
Yeah.
You never know. You never know.
Every day we're up there in age, and we're looking at people. Someone just passed away. People may not know the name from the dance music world, but he was one of the biggest R&B independent promotion people who worked for about 5 different labels. Ruben Rodriguez passed away.
Oh,
Passed away last week.
no
So
kidding. Gosh,
yeah,
what a shame. Yes,
and
I remember Ruben.
so it's we're in an era. We're talking about here, Marsha. We're here sitting here articulating the evolution of dance music and whatever. I will say unequivocally that even though I'm putting out more R&B records right now, because first of all, that was the foundation of dance music anyway. Motown and Philly International and what have you. We lived in a period of these records and of these sounds. I don't know if it will ever be captivated. It captivated a market and a consumer. I don't know if we can ever get that feeling back again. I don't want to sound like sour grapes, but we still have house music. EDM is for the festivals and what have you. I mean, I'm still old fashioned. I like a song, whether it's an
I
R&B
do
song.
too. A beginning, a middle, and an end.
Exactly.
I like the story. But Ray, I like to think that as we move forward, as we progress musically, as we progress as a society, that the heartbeat will evolve to maybe a new heartbeat for the newer generation. Because let's face it, our parents kind of looked down their noses at us and what we thought were our heartbeats because it wasn't theirs. So I'm saying maybe like that age thing is creeping up, and because we don't understand it doesn't mean that it's not there.
Well, that's
And
true.
I think a very important part of what I want to bring to this podcast are other perspectives. I do want to get some younger generations in here. I do want to get some people in here that can give me a story of what's going on for them in their world. And I also want to preserve the legacy of what we helped create back then because it was
Right.
so important. And without knowing where you've come from, you're never going to know really how to get to where you're going.
Right. I appreciate that narrative. When I think of some of the records I've been, involved with or what have you, when I think of Change and the Glow of Love or the Savannah Band or Chaka Khan or Ashford and Simpson, and I just think about these records, and you know what? They're timeless.
They are.
They're
They are.
classics. I have a
And
group
they're as
on.
timeless as Beethoven's Ninth. I mean,
No,
when you
yeah, no
have
kidding.
something that is a classic origin, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be a Tiffany necklace. It doesn't matter if it is classic. If it is worthy, it will linger, and that does tend to evolve and change through time. But what a wonderful legacy that you can rest your laurels on, that you've given us to listen and dance to for these many years. And again, I say thank you personally for being such a tremendously positive influence in my career and in my life.
Well, I appreciate that, Marsha. And now, in present time, we relaunched the RFC label.
Tell us a
About
little bit about your latest artists. I just put a graphic up of your
yeah,
latest 3 releases. Please
yeah.
do tell us a
These
bit.
are 3 releases that we put out in the last 90 days. They're doing exceptionally well in the UK, and that's where we break a lot of our records now. I use the UK soul internet stations as my foundation to break records and what have you, because they
Is
still.
the UK not the hot R&B locale in the world these days? I mean, they've really taken over rulership
They,
of R&B.
That is true, and they have internet stations that play the music and help break artists. And so there's Petawane. Uh, this is his 3rd release with us. I Got What You Need. Sons of Funk is a new group that they're kind of doing a funky R&B up-tempo song. And Taiwan, who's a prolific songwriter, Love on the Dance Floor. All these 3 records are making noise in the UK and starting to break through in the US. And prior to that, when we relaunched the RFC Fresh label, we started with did a collaboration with Lenny Fontana. Manny knows about that. He worked with Lenny, and we did a D Train record, Raise Your Hands, and it was
I thought you had an overlap with Lenny and D Train.
Yeah.
I was Lenny was actually my first guest on this podcast,
Right.
and I was very happily a guest on his True House Stories with Robbie.
There you go. And we then also did Melissa Morgan, who has been around in the R&B world, very successful. We did a ballad with Christopher Williams, who's had a lot of R&B hits and what have you. And so the journey continues. What can I say? Maybe I'm not doing.
God bless, my friend, and keep it going strong. One foot in front of the other, and as long as you continue to have this joyful tenor to your voice and a lift in your step, and I know you're doing this from the heart, you can't go wrong, Ray. Everything you've done, it's all full from passion.
If people who want to go back and reflect on the various songs and history and some of the photos that you've shown here, I have a group on Facebook called The History of Dance Music, hosted by RFC. Take a look at it. It has over 13,000 members. A lot of people post a lot of iconic past records there and photos and what have you. Feel free to join and take a look at that. It'll take you on a little golden ride of the history of dance music.
There is one picture here that I'm going to show that will close us out because it just kind of says it in a nutshell. Here's Grace Jones tasting your ear from Lord only knows. But, not for nothing. That's what our world is filled of. Magical, fabulous moments like that. Those moments create multiple heartbeats. Those heartbeats create a wonderful, wonderful life. Ray, I can't thank you enough for being my guest here today. We've got your runner going on the bottom of our YouTube broadcast. Please make sure that you find Ray on Facebook at Ray Caviano, or as he said, as his group, History of Dance Music, also on Facebook. Check out all the new releases on RFC Fresh Records, Ray's new label. And Raymond, from my first day until today and beyond, thank you so much. You have meant so much to me in my career, and it means so much to me to have you share your stories about our heartbeat.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it. You are one of the instrumental figures in my evolutionary days of dance music.
Well, thank you, Ray. I wear that as a true badge of pride.
There you go.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you on our next broadcast of The Heartbeat of the Dance Floor. Goodbye now, and stay well.